Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. And I'm your host, Brian Funk. I make music as AfroDJMac. And today I'm talking to Emilio Guarino, who wrote a book called Making It, a guide for recent music graduates.
Make
And
it. Make it.
Make it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's
Make
all
it.
good. Yeah. Happens
So,
all the time.
well, welcome, Emilio. How are you?
Thanks. I'm great, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I apologize about that.
No worries.
Maybe it's because I'm thinking it's like such an active process. It's an ongoing thing. It's not
That
like
you're actually, yeah, I was actually going to say it maybe one of the things about the title that could be better is it makes it sound like a static event
Right.
which like the music thing especially like definitely is not. It's like an ongoing
like I
so
made
what
it.
I'm looking for. Yeah, it does. It's not how it works at all.
Yeah,
When you say you've made it, right, it's kind of like you just accept the fact that it's like sort of this lifestyle and a process that never really ends, you know.
You've like climbed the mountain and now you're in some fictional paradise.
Nah, it's not. That's not a no. There's no mountain to climb. It's about becoming a mountain climber, I think.
Probably one of my favorite definitions of actually having made it came from Dave Grohl from Nirvana.
Okay.
And he said, when I saw Weird Al do Smells Like Nirvana, the parody of Smells Like Teen Spirit, he's like, then I knew we made it. Like, that's how I knew. So I think that's maybe that's like one way to define it.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, thanks so much for taking the time. And thanks for writing the book too. It's really great. Maybe I can just ask you for a minute to just tell us about yourself, what you're up to, and how you got to actually putting this book together.
Yeah. So I'm just the kind of dude. I've been banging around in music in some capacity since I was a kid. So that ultimately led to deciding to go to music school. So I went and did that. I did an undergrad and a master's degree at two, nice programs in like a conservatory kind of setting. And that was an amazing experience. I'm really glad and thankful that I was able to go and do something like that. And I was the kind of kid I came in like not like I was not like the all-star of the class by a long shot. Like I had a lot of work to do. That was sort of one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. So I went in and I just practiced like a maniac for whatever it was, like the 4 or 6 years or whatever. And in as far as like my development as a player, it was like huge. It did so much stuff. I had amazing mentorship from all my teachers there, and they were able to get me in my playing to a place that I didn't even think I could get to. So that was really cool. But the thing that the music schools weren't, at least the ones that I went to, that they weren't so good at like the career stuff. Like, so it's like, okay, now you have these cool skills, you can play and you can write and arrange and these things. How do you turn that into the kind of living that you want to have? And I hear this talked about more and more, as I think it should be. So basically I finished school and then I did everything I could to hit the ground running. So I live in New Jersey. So I was looking locally. I started teaching lessons and doing gigs with people, getting into New York a lot to play with different people, and just starting to get all the gears turning on the music machine. Then what led to the book was, I want to say about 3 or 4 years after I finished school. Like I didn't wake up one day and say like, "Hey guys, I got it together and you got to know about it." Right? It wasn't like that at all. How it started was I would just talk to people who were like coming. Sometimes it was like younger music students who were they were like maybe a sophomore in college and they were thinking ahead like, how is this going to work when I'm done? Or I had a couple friends who were getting ready to finish school and like kind of freaking out about it, like, oh my god, like like I have this whole super structured schedule until this date and then it's just nothing but white space. Like, what do I do? Oh my god. So people started asking me because they're like, oh, it seems like you're busy with stuff and like you're kind of doing it. And I said, yeah, that's true. I'm not like on top of the world by any means. I think there's still a lot more to go for me. At least I hope, But I got to the point where I was just like doing music as my job by putting together a bunch of different things. So people just started asking about it. Um, so it started with that, like just very informal conversations like this, just me and somebody else chatting, or I'd get a phone call. I had a couple, like when I was teaching a lot more lessons, I had phone calls from like former students who just said like, "Hey, I think I'm going to do this music thing, and I think I maybe want to go into this. What do you think?" And so then that happened. Then I started writing things down because I started giving the same kinds of advice
Right,
over and
right.
over again to different people. Um, just yeah, and it was all like simple stuff. Just how to start making contacts and how to like it's kind of weird sometimes if you're gonna like ask somebody for work, like ask for a gig. And it depends on who you're talking to, but there's like ways to do that um, that are okay, and ways where you can kind of put your foot in your mouth. Um,
Sure, sure.
so yeah, I would just like advise as best I could there. All these things I'm still working on and improving, as we all are. But so anyway, basically how the book thing came together is I was writing a lot. Part of it just for fun, part of it for the sake of clarifying my own thoughts on certain things.
Hmm.
Um, and then at that time, I was traveling a bunch for a project, so I had a lot of long flights.
Yeah.
And I said, rather than like I would, maybe watch a movie or something, but I spent a lot of that time on these long flights just writing on my laptop, and um, that would pass the time for me, and I would get something out of it by the time I was done. And that's how things came together. And eventually, I had enough material, and it was in a structure that started to make sense. Where I said, "Hey, maybe I should just do this." Talked to a couple former teachers and that kind of thing. They thought it was a cool idea, specifically because I'm a young person who's just
Right.
still really fresh in this market. Where some of my teachers who are older, they have a certain wisdom that I don't have yet because they've been doing it for 30 or 40 years, right?
Hmm.
But then the other side of that coin is when they got started, it was 30 years ago. Things
Yeah.
were quite different then. And certain things are the same. Certain stuff is more evergreen, but they were like, yeah, this would be a good thing to do for other people who are coming into the working world now from college, and would be curious about this stuff. So that's basically the short version of how all of this came together.
Hmm. Very natural process, it seems.
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't. Man, it's the kind of thing, like, if you told me when I was like, I'm 30 now, if somebody told me when I was 22 that like, "Oh, yeah, you're gonna do a book in a couple years," I would've just been like,
Right.
"Whatever, man." Like,
Yeah.
I would've just laughed at it, you know?
Hmm.
But, yeah, I don't know, I guess from talking to people, it made me feel like, okay, maybe I do have something of value that I could share with people. Um, and that was really the incentive to take this writing I was doing and really formalize it and get an editor and do the whole and put it out there,
Yeah.
do the whole thing.
Make a whole project of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You said a couple things that I think are really interesting and like strong points to remember, and stuff
Yeah,
that every once in a while I hear and I'm like, oh yeah, that's obvious, but it's important
yeah,
sometimes. Um, the First of all, like I really like that you pointed out that you are kind of leveraging like you were just straight out of school and you didn't know
yeah,
how to do this stuff not that
yeah,
long ago.
yeah,
And that is like a perspective that I think a lot of times people sort of like think is a weakness, but it
yeah,
is actually, when you look at it, is a strong point because you
yeah,
know what's going on. And someone that may have been teaching for 20 years, their idea of getting a gig is like calling some of their familiar contacts that they've worked with. And
yeah.
as a newcomer, you don't always have that.
Nope, nope. How do you? Yeah, I mean, I think like I've told a lot of people this, especially after the book came out. I think in terms of mentorship,
Hmm.
especially when you're in that position of starting things, you need to have a couple people in your like 2 or 3 people in your life who are at different stages of career.
Hmm.
So it's good to have that teacher who is 50 years ahead of you, right? and they've kind of seen all this different stuff. They've seen a lot of change. Um, you need that like sort of guru character, who's just like been all over the place. But then I think it's also good to have a couple people in your life who are a little bit closer to where you're at. Like maybe somebody who's like 10 years ahead of you. And then, then you have your peers who were maybe like around your age, or like, maybe 5 years older than you are,
Yeah.
or 5 years kind of ahead in terms of experience. And I think between like if you have like sort of three levels of that, then you can get a good feel for, um, things that are sort of constant throughout time. And then also for the stuff that's maybe unique to right now, that maybe, like, I mean, just like with all this internet stuff, like podcasts did not exist very recently. This is a
Yeah.
new thing. So, talking to somebody who's in their 70s about podcasts,
Right.
like they maybe they're familiar, but they're going to be just as new to it as we are.
Uh-huh.
So, and or maybe they might not even be on their radar just because of what you're saying. Like they might be working with contacts that they've had for a very long time, and they don't really need to get into something like
Yeah.
podcasting,
It's not
right?
necessary. Yeah.
Right. They're like, why would I do that? I have everything I need. So yeah, I think it's just good to have a couple different people in your life that you can go to about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I more and more, and I teach. I teach music. I
Yeah.
teach high school English also, and
Cool.
more, I find I learn so much teaching, and a lot of the people I work with are at all different levels. Especially with the music, it's really interesting because I'll be teaching people that are worlds ahead of me, like as a musician, but don't
Yeah.
know how to use Ableton Live or how to like
Sure.
compress their drum kit, and that's
Sure.
something I understand a little bit. And it's funny how like there's all these different like ways to get wisdom from all different levels. And
Yeah.
like you said, like it could even be someone starting out new. They're kind of like scrapping along and they're doing something you haven't seen yet, and it
Yeah.
might be working out for them.
Hmm.
It's always good to keep those like eyes open for anything from you can learn anything from anybody. Everyone has
Yeah.
something to learn. So important. And sometimes I think like as we progress, it's very easy to become like, oh, I already know how to do this. And like you let your experience almost become your blinders in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's like a whole other thing. Is I think there's a lot of value in being a beginner at something.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you might be like some of your students you're talking about. Like maybe you're a really really amazing instrumentalist. Like you could just play anything that they put in front of you, but you're a beginner when it comes to mixing or recording stuff. I think that's a great thing to do. Both because you're building a new skill set that you can use to expand what you already do, but there's something, it does something good to your brain when you're
Hmm.
just in the deep end at something and you
Yeah.
have to figure it out, and you're like exploring again for the first time. I think that's a really important feeling to purposefully expose yourself to, like, throughout life at different stages. I mean, one of the things that really made me think about that was when I was a kid. There was this old man who would come to tune our piano, and he was like really amazing, right? He would come tune the piano, and then he'd have some fun just like playing it for us, and he would play real repertoire. It would, Rachmaninoff, Beethoven sonatas and stuff, all from memory. So I assumed this guy was a retired piano player or something, and
Uh-huh.
the situation was actually the opposite. This dude worked in banking for in I forget when I think he retired like in his 60s or something.
Hmm.
And then when he retired, he said the two things he wanted to do were learn how to play the piano and speak French.
Hmm.
So he did both those things. And by the time that we met this dude, he was, maybe he was like pushing 80,
Right.
right? So, and I was like, "Oh, so you've been playing piano for 15 years, but you just started when you were like in your mid 60s."
Yeah.
um, but he was one of these dudes, as old as he was, his brain was like still sharp as a tack. He wasn't. um, he wasn't at, like, he didn't seem like you were talking to somebody who had been there and done that. He showed no signs of slowing down.
Hmm.
So that was one of those things where I said, "Oh, this is a really cool old person. I want to be like this."
Yeah, I like that. That's a cool
Yeah,
story.
yeah,
I think we very often like are afraid of being a beginner. Like as we get older, like is like
yeah,
this shame in not being good at something. And
yep,
and you get these like kind of like, you know, the fixed mindset where it's like I'm just
yeah,
not artistic. I'm just not this. I just can't do that. But the fact is you just haven't put the time in. And
yeah,
I think that's where people get stale and kind of bored in their lives when they're not exposing themselves to that new perspective of being fresh at something and doing something you've never done.
yeah. I
Sometimes it
think,
means I always like the guys like you're talking about, like in
yeah,
college, there'd be every once in a while you take a class and there'd be like a really old guy in the back. And
yeah,
you like, no, like he's probably not going for a degree. He's not like trying to get into like this new career, like but he just wants to learn.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's
I
really
think
cool.
learning like that is it's an important thing to do, to put yourself into that uncomfortable situation of
Hmm.
being a beginner and not being able to rest on your laurels at all. And then I think also it's good to have a couple things in your life where you're not going to be super type A and like I have to be awesome at this and I'm going to go like,
Uh-huh.
it's cool to have a couple things that you're not great at but you do just to do. I think hobbies are wonderful, and sometimes like, especially when you start exploring some of this stuff, like you read business books and career stuff and how to build, it's all very like linear and like do this and that and then you get to this goal and then you could do this and then this is awesome, and like um like I can barely draw a stick figure, but sometimes it's fun to just draw for fun.
Uh-huh. Gotcha.
um they both have a place. It's a balance that needs to be maintained, I think.
Yeah, just doing something to do it, not necessarily even because like it's like this embarrassment or something we put on ourselves like, oh, look at
Yeah,
my stick figure, you know, like, well, who
yeah,
cares? You know, like what's the
yeah.
difference? Just do it.
That's
Just enjoy
do
it.
you, do you teach like adults and children? Do you do a mix of the two?
Yeah, it's well with like my like high school work with
Yeah,
English, which is like the you know, grown-up job.
grown up job. Yeah.
That's, you know, 14 to 18-year olds.
Okay.
And
Right.
that's interesting in its own right. And then with music production, then it tends to be people college age and older, and sometimes
Okay.
it goes all the way up. And
Yeah.
but every once in a while, you get like someone who might be like senior in high school that's getting into
Mm-hmm.
music production.
Mm.
Yeah,
Because the reason I ask is I find that one of the big differences in teaching adults versus teaching little kids is, like, people always think that, oh, you need to start music when you're young to
yeah,
pick it up, and that's not true at all. Like, I've just seen too many adult students get really good pretty
yeah,
quickly. But I think one of the things that holds adults back is they're afraid to suck at something.
yeah.
Like, they get really up because they like with a little kid, they're still they haven't been exposed to as much. So when they're playing piano or something, and like they might sound pretty terrible, but they do not care. They're just happy to do it, and they're not in this thing where they're like judging what's happening yet.
Hmm.
Whereas with adults, like, because you think about it, adults are better at learning music in some regards because they know how to, usually they know how to work pretty hard. They know about like time management. They have experience learning other skills so they
Right.
can apply it to. Whereas like when you have an 8-year-old, that like they don't know how to prioritize and they don't know about muscle memory, or like they're still forming all of that. So yeah, I find with adults that when you teach them anyway, they're afraid of being that beginner who's like bad at something.
Yeah.
But the flip side is if you can like not get too bent out of shape about it and just be okay with the fact that you're not going to sound like a rock star for a while.
Hmm.
Like if you could get over that, then I've seen enough of those people get really good at music to the point where I'm a little jealous. you know like you have some other career and you're doing this and you as a hobby, man, like
Yeah.
that's incredible. I've seen it too many times.
Yeah, every once in a while you hear about that person that winds up leaving their job to do whatever because they something they just took up on the side, and next thing you
Yeah.
know, yeah, like we don't give ourselves the permission to suck, whereas like a little kid is like kind of expected. But
Yeah, I think it's like that's yeah, people just they get a little bit too hard on themselves sometimes about these things.
uh-huh.
And as far as like the music career stuff, I am completely guilty of this. I say this from a place of experience because sometimes like like doing anything creative, it's like or not even that. Like if you're running, if you're trying to build anything, it could be like even a little business or something for yourself that has nothing to do with the arts. Like there's ups and downs to the thing. Like there's going to be some times where it's like it's all clicking and you're like, oh my god, this is amazing, and then like other times where you're it's getting kind of tight and your things aren't working and you can't figure out why, and you're like um so I think if you get into like defining yourself by the success or failure of that kind of stuff, it's like
Mm.
it's and like I've totally fallen into this, and I said, man, this is brutal. I gotta just take a step back and try to be a little bit more objective about how I'm relating this stuff to myself.
Yeah, you're putting your like your judgment of your success on outside sources and things
Yep.
you have no control over.
Yep.
Where
Yep. Exactly.
the real like, and you point this out in your book a lot, where
Yeah.
it's more like you really have to count on like doing the work, showing up,
Oh, of
actually
course.
putting, that's your success. That's,
Yeah.
and like a lot of writers will do this, musicians, where they need to just produce for, X amount of time. I need to write 800 words every day. I don't
Yeah.
care if half of it's garbage because I
Yeah.
know eventually some of it will be good. And
Yeah.
that's a practice. It's just over and over again.
Yeah. I like it's funny. Like, it applies to a lot of things. Um, like I'm pretty into like fitness and keeping in shape and that kind of stuff.
Mm,
There's a lot of people in that world who um, they they think of like they don't think that you train to get strong. They think that being strong is more of this practice. It's something that you just do, and it's this groove that you kind of get into rather than it being um, this like really linear thing where you like start at A and then go to B and then you're done.
yeah.
It's
I'm fit.
it's not like that. Yeah, yeah. And you're like, okay, I'm buff now. Now we're done. We don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, no, no, no. It's a process that just happens. It's not a linear trip that has a start and an end. It's just something that you do. It's sort of a way of life. And I think producing music for sure. That's just you have to sit down and be like, we're gonna work from this time to this time, and maybe we get some gold, maybe we don't, but we're gonna sit down and just do it.
Yeah. It'd be like defining like your fitness by like how much you could bench or something.
Yeah,
Where
right,
and
right.
and fitness is a great example because that is like the starkest wake up call. Like you could be in great shape, but take a month off. Take just even a
Oh
couple
yeah.
weeks sometimes and you really feel it. It's like you're never staying in one spot. You're either moving
Mm-hmm.
forward or back. And it's
Yeah.
easy to forget that. And certain activities, like you kind of maintain a little better. It's like
Yeah.
riding a bike, they'll say,
Yeah.
where you can still do it even
Mm-hmm.
after maybe a couple years of not, but
Yep.
it's still deteriorating. And that's like
Yeah.
we're in this constant either state of growth or decay. And I
Yeah. I've been kind of getting a dose of that lately. I've like when I put the book out, I would say that like 90% of my live performing work was like classical music, like orchestral or chamber music
mhm.
kind of stuff. So it was all upright, like for
Bass.
whatever.
I don't think
Yeah,
we
upright
mentioned that.
bass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's your
Oh, yeah.
instrument.
Did I mention? Yeah.
I don't think
I'm
we
talking
did.
about music school.
But
Yeah. Oh my god, I play the bass. Yeah, that's an important thing to maybe know. Well, I get maybe not. I don't know. Like the book isn't meant for bass players. I
right.
tried to keep it pretty open for all kinds of people who are just in music or even maybe in
I can
some
see
kind
the
of
book working, we could just use music as a metaphor in a lot of
yeah,
cases for other
yeah.
things.
So yeah, I mean, but so anyway, like when it came out, a lot of the stuff I was doing, the live performance was all like classical upright bass stuff. You know, for whatever reason, lately I've been doing more electric kind of work, you know, playing like funk bands and doing covers and that kind of stuff, and or like recording on other people's productions and that kind of thing. Um, and that's where I started playing bass. But there was a long time where I really wasn't doing any electric work. Um, so you know, the first couple times where I was up on stage playing with the band, it was a little bit like it sounded okay, but on the inside I was a little bit like, oh shit, like I got to be on top of this, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but again, that's just one of those things. It's a little bit like riding a bike, but you also need to keep that groove fresh to really feel
Yeah.
comfortable doing it too.
Yeah, I guess maybe you could think about it like you can still ride the bike, but you're not doing your tricks right away.
Nope,
You know,
no,
you
no.
gotta like all that advanced stuff. You
Yeah,
gotta really stay on top of.
yeah, no backflips.
Yeah, I'm sure that it's like a give and take. The more you work with electric, then you kind of feel like the other stuff with the upright bass, like, oh, I gotta kind of maintain that too.
Yeah,
So,
well, that's why I think all these, like having times where you purposefully go into something you're not as familiar with,
mhm,
and also is like having some of these hobby kind of things where you're just learning up about it, but not really um, being too strict with yourself in terms of what you expect to get to. I think the reason that all that stuff is so important is because everything, it's all in the same pot. You know, it's not too compartmentalized. So like, you know, if you to use the example we brought up before, if you're a really great performer and then you decide you want to learn about recording and production, that's absolutely going to influence how you play.
right.
It's this feedback loop that goes back and forth. So that's one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about this stuff, is because it everything raises everything else up. It doesn't just exist
Yeah.
in a vacuum and then like you close the door on the recording stuff and then go back to playing. No, it doesn't. It's all connected.
Yeah, that's very true. And there have been so many times where working on one thing has actually helped me in the other area. Even if
Yeah,
like maybe, like I'm a guitar player, so
yeah,
maybe like my guitar chops themselves, maybe they slowed down a little, but
yeah,
I'm approaching it in a fresher way on some other aspect because I've been doing so much other work in
yeah,
other
for sure.
realms. So, yeah, it's weird how it all kind of ties together, but it's also like, I guess like everything kind of grows together, but you still have to sort of go back and like polish the surface a little bit, smooth out the rough edges. Like
For
that
sure.
that stuff happens fast.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
It was funny, like especially with music and like doing the whole conservatory track, right? They sort of, it made me think a lot about what things in music I value as being musical,
Hmm.
which is kind of a weird thing, but like like when you're in school, like a lot of the music that I was studying, you know, it's like a lot of jazz music, a lot of classical music, and they would be really into the musicality that you can get to through, you know, pretty sophisticated harmonies, or the way something is orchestrated, like the way that you split up that harmony, and um, or certain kinds of musical forms, like what the value in that is in terms of affecting people. Um, so they get that into your brain, but I think that stuff is like it's one side of a many-sided, you know, set of dice. It's not, you know, and I think like especially getting into Ableton and learning that and exploring electronic music, there's so much of that music where um, the musicality of it, the part that affects you, doesn't really fit into some of these things that are emphasized when you're in a university music program. Um, so like for example, like in electronic music, a lot of it is about the kinds of sounds you choose and the kinds of textures you might use. That's something, you know, like in a couple years of music school, we didn't really talk about that much, to be
Hmm.
honest. But then you look at like you look at somebody like Tim Hecker, who I love everything he does, right? So much of his music, it's about blend and texture, because like there's not like a lot of harmony happening in a lot of it. And or like it's ambient music, so there's not even a ton of rhythm. There's like rhythmic things, but it's
Yeah.
not like it has a groove you can tap your foot to. At least some things maybe a little bit, but like that's a good example of something where his music, I think it's it definitely affects me. I feel it very strongly, but I started thinking like, why does this affect me? Like
Mm.
what, or like just looking at the form of it, like how this doesn't really fit into a lot of what was emphasized during my formal education years. Um, so I think just some of this tangential creative stuff, it makes you go back to music that I analyzed in like that college setting, and I look at it completely differently now because I have this other way of looking at it.
That's
It's not
interesting.
just yeah, it's not like you can go and listen to like yeah, a record like something like Bitches Brew, Miles Davis record, like you can look at it through the lens of like the rhythmic sophistication or the harmonic stuff or melodic content, but then looking at it through the eyes of an electronic musician in terms of textures and mixing, um, you get to some different places when you look at it through that other lens.
Yeah, that is pretty cool to think about. And I guess maybe part of it is like a lot of classical music, orchestral music, like a lot of that those decisions about textures have sort of been made already just
Yeah,
by the ensemble you have.
yeah,
And it's not as much of a, obviously there's things to be considered, which instruments are
hmm,
going to play which parts, but it's
yeah,
not as wide of a palette as electronic music,
yeah,
where I mean anything, it could be just the breath of your voice looping in a weird way is now like its
for
own
sure,
layer.
for sure. I like that's one of the things that brought me to electronic music, is just that wildness
Hmm.
in it. Like it's kind of like the Wild West in terms of music, because you could like it's sort of anything goes. Whatever, if you find something that has an effect, has an impact, then it's legitimate. So and like you said, it could be anything. It could be just some sound that you found how to layer it or loop it in some way, and oh, all of a sudden it works and it's something. Um, that like maybe trying to think when I was like a freshman or a sophomore in college, I remember getting into Aphex Twin for the first time and being like, "What is the?" Like just having no framework for how to process that kind of music. But I immediately loved it, so I was like, "I got to get into this and explore what grabs me so much about this music. What quality is that?" Because I didn't have a vocabulary to really describe it or talk about it.
Yeah, that's been a big thing that's really made me excited about a lot of the music I make now is just
Yeah.
coming up with these like interesting sounds from strange sources, and maybe it's like secretly like what it was and like how it came together.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
I saw in some of the performance videos you have on your website though, like you're not just playing notes on the bass.
Nope.
You're playing a lot with like noises you can make with a bass, I might almost say.
Oh, yeah.
Like and
Yeah.
textures of the bow just scraping the strings or smacking against the body. I
Yep.
thought that was like pretty interesting, and I think maybe there's some sort of connection there somehow that bridges you.
Yeah. That there's a piece that I've played a couple times called it's called Valentine by a composer named Jacob Druckmann.
Mhm.
Um and yeah, it's a solo bass piece, and the whole thing is written in its own kind of notation. Like the front of the score has it has a little key that says like this symbol means make this sound, and that could be there's vocal sounds that need to happen. There's a decent amount of the piece where you're kind of drumming on the bass with a mallet. um
That's cool.
yeah, it's a very theatrical piece. there's certain parts that need to be a little bit acted. Um, but that's the kind of thing where the the musicality of the piece, the thing that I find has an impact on people, it doesn't necessarily analyze so neatly in a lot of these traditional like music theory kind of ways.
Mm.
There's something else going on. So that's a good example. The kind of concert music that has a similar appeal for me as a lot of this electronic music that I'm also interested in. It's that thing where you're like, this is really cool, and I really like it, and I really don't know why. That's so like, um, yeah, and there's a lot of pieces like that where that is the appeal, is because I'm like, what is this? How is this grabbing me? Um, you know, not and also not to discredit music that does analyze really well. Like I can go and sit down and hear a concert of Beethoven and like love it and just be
Yeah.
totally into it. But I think just because of the training, I understand that a little bit better in terms of why it has the grab that it does.
Hmm.
Because it's music that's been around for a while. People have picked it apart. There's stacks of stuff in the academic literature that gets into why it might grab you, and what some of the underlying mechanisms are. I took a really interesting course in grad school that we spent maybe a third of the class. I think it was called cognitive music history. It was maybe a third of the class was just dedicated to analyzing instances of silence in classical music.
Cool.
Which you thought of in terms of being like kind of like one brush color, right? Like silence. You're like, okay, it's a moment of nothing. And after I did this whole thing, I said, no, 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 no. There's like many kinds of silences that occur in music that have different functions and a different quality to them. So after I took that, it was like that's just one of those like mind bending sort of experiences where you do that, and then you think of a lot of things in music, or a lot of things just like in art and movies. A lot of it like really, really differently, because sometimes you'll look at a certain element and think of it as being maybe not so interesting, but if you dig deeper and lean in, you could find that there's a lot of sophistication that you maybe were glossing over for a while.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
It's like that microscope effect where it just looks like this one thing until you zoom in and really pay attention.
Exactly.
And you see it's
Yeah.
actually all kinds of stuff. I
There's a lot of action. Yeah.
probably enjoy that a lot because I think silence is often like underrepresented in music, like as far as like, or undercredited maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Miles Davis that said, wasn't Miles Davis maybe that said something about like the most important notes are the ones he doesn't play.
That's I'm not sure if that was him, but that sounds like something he might say.
Somebody that knows what he's talking about said that.
Yeah, I mean, space is.
Yeah.
There's all different kinds of silence and space, and if you start thinking about it that way, I think when you listen, you'll start to hear some interesting things.
I get that feeling sometimes when I'm learning something on guitar that's really hard to play, fast or difficult.
Yeah.
And when you're first learning, it just seems like all these things are coming at me so fast. But as it starts becoming more comfortable, you start to really feel the distance between things.
Yep.
And it's suddenly like when you can feel that, then you suddenly have the time to make the finger changes or whatever that needs to happen. But it's really hard to notice that until you get like some sort of comfort with it.
For sure.
Difficult thing to find. It's cool though. That sounds like a great class.
It was that was like in all of college, that was one of the cooler ones I think I took. Granted, it was one of the hardest ones I took because this dude, like, basically every class you had to write him a new paper and you had to have an opinion about something, and he was gonna like hold your feet to the fire and make you talk about it. So you couldn't. There was like one or two classes where I just like wasn't as prepared as I should have been, and and it was awful.
Yeah.
Because he was like pushing me to have like a stance on something, and I was like too wishy-washy, and that's when I was like, we're never doing this again. So then I went really hard in that one class, and it was, like I said, one of the more important ones I took probably in all of college, because it shaped how I think about a lot of things now.
Mm. And it's about not making noise. you know, and that's like such a.
Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely something I've encountered over the years playing with people.
yeah,
More mature musicians know when to not play,
yeah.
and just
That's worth a lot.
yeah, it's not always an easy thing to find, and something
Hmm.
like it's humbling too. You know, as you're playing and you realize maybe I shouldn't play, and it'll sound better.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it's a hard thing to sometimes swallow, but you know, it's in the bigger picture. You know, in the full, you know, composition. Sometimes it's exactly what it needs.
yeah. Well, in the production side of things too, I think um, one thing I've been very guilty of. It sometimes can be cool, but like just putting in way too many parts.
Yeah.
Sometimes, when I'm overwhelmed with something, or there's like a track and it's not quite working, and I don't know why. I start muting stuff and
Hmm.
turning off effects, and just see if I can cut it down to the most, um, to sort of the core of what I want things to be, and then add stuff back in from there. And then like, I can't tell you how many times where I do that, and then like half the parts I thought it needed get trashed because I
Yeah.
was like, this isn't serving the thing. It doesn't need to be 16 things happening at one time. We can get away with 4, and it sounds great.
It's funny because like sometimes those are the things you work the hardest on, and you
Uh-huh.
like just don't want to let go because you know that was like 4 hours to get that sound right, and
Right,
it's
right.
it's like kind of sad when you realize that it didn't work out. But I
Yeah.
like that process a lot actually because um, a lot of times when I'm working on something new and I don't really know where I'm going with it, I just kind of
Hmm.
take apart and build it up into this massive thing, and I might not even have another section yet.
Yeah,
And I find that sometimes that's a good way to go is to like build my most climactic part because I'm sort of
yeah.
tempted to go in that direction anyway. It's because you can. I mean, you got as many tracks as you need, as many sounds and plugins, and we have
Yep.
way more tools than we could ever really use properly. So it's
Yeah.
so tempting to do everything, but sometimes working it up to the maximum and then subtracting away is like what it needs. Like you get that, you scratch that itch of like building something crazy big, and then it's like, okay, now let's just remove things to come up with the rest of the song.
Yeah, I think also one thing that's helped me more recently is, along that note, like when I have to start taking things out, and you have the issue of being attached to something because you put a bunch of time into it, so you don't want to get rid
Yeah.
of it or not use it. I've I've been working on getting better at just being more organized with how my sounds are kind of, how they're cataloged on my computer. Because that way, if I have something that I really like and I'm like, hey, there's still something here, but it's not working for this track,
Hmm.
it's not a big deal. Then we just bounce it out, put it in the archive, and maybe I use it some other day, or maybe I get over it and we never use it, and that's fine. Um,
Right.
but just knowing that it's somewhere and I can get to it quickly if I want it, that makes things easier for me to mute and delete a little bit more ruthlessly.
Yeah, that's
So-
smart.
and yeah, and then it's cool too because then you have this folder full of stuff that's already started, so
Yeah.
you're not stuck with that problem of like of like the blank page
Hmm.
in the computer, and you're like, oh, like I have nothing, like, or you know what I'm talking
Oh,
about, whether
totally.
you're
Yeah.
writing or producing. Yeah, sometimes just it's intimidating having an open file with nothing in it, and you're like, what are we gonna do today?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier to just drag in one of these orphaned little ideas, and then you're like, okay, good. Now we have something's there. We're over that problem. Now let's see if we can add something to it.
Yeah, and that's like kind of a nice way to like kill an idea without sentencing it to death. You
Yeah,
can like, I have it and I can use it, so that work wasn't wasted.
yeah.
But at least then yeah, I like that idea a lot. That's something I got to work on myself is like being more organized with that stuff. Like,
It's a struggle, man. At least for me.
yeah, I mean, I told you before we started talking on the podcast, like how
Yeah.
I've been whittling down my email inbox. I'm like really
Hmm.
proud of myself. 'Cause I can't tell you how many
Yeah.
emails, and if you've anyone listening's gotten an email from me, half of them start with like, "I'm sorry about the delay. I'm sorry it's taking me so long." It's just because there's like this ocean of stuff that
Yeah.
you know, but bringing that down has like made me so much snappier with dealing with things as they come up.
Hmm.
And I've heard somewhere, I don't even know where I heard this, but it was just like some advice. Maybe it's someone talking to, I don't remember. That was like, if it'll take you less than a minute to do it, just do it now. Just,
Oh yeah,
just
for
do it,
sure.
because otherwise it's gonna make a pile, and that pile's now an hour, and it's
Right.
scary, and
Yeah.
it's like the laundry I have to do right now. It's like 3 hampers full. Whereas if I would have just done it,
Yeah.
periodically, and it just
Yeah.
becomes this thing you think about, and so it's something
It weighs on you.
I need a good system, figure something out where I can put those little things and just have them away.
The
Um,
thing that got me started doing, I wish I could be like, I'm going to be responsible and start cataloging. It wasn't like that. What happened was, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about doing things just to do them, even if it's like in a low pressure way where you're not trying to achieve something. Um, what I started doing was like I was always looking for sounds, and I was like, oh, maybe I should use more of my own sounds and get into making it. So I just started doing more field recording on my phone
hmm,
because modern smartphone is like a decent field recorder at this point.
I totally agree. It's so much
Yeah,
better to
it's
have the recording than to be snobby about like it's just a cell phone mic, and not get the recording.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've gotten there's 2 tracks I'm working on now that I'm probably going to put out in like a month or two that are heavily crafted with field recordings that I did on my phone, just where I was in some interesting place, and I was like, I want to grab this. I don't care if it's iPhone record, like it's fine, it's all good.
Hmm.
Like I said, it doesn't have to be recorded perfectly with your Neumann rifle mics or like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that all the time.
You almost never have them on you.
Right. Well, because the other thing is like if I can't do it quickly and just be like, ooh, grab that thing. Like, I'm I'm probably not gonna do it as often if it's like a this whole production that I need to set up
Yeah.
mics and get levels and like. Um, so anyway, like I started doing these field recordings, and then they started to fill up my phone, so I dumped them on the computer, and then they were a mess. And then I said, "Oh, I should probably organize these a little bit, because some of it was just like sounds, some of it was like little snippets from a gig where something really cool was happening, and I was like, oh, I just want to be able to remember this because it's would make a nice reference track or something.
Hmm.
Um, so, or sometimes it was even like little notes I would make to myself. I just have an idea, so I would record it real quick on the phone, and so I started organizing it that way, and then that grew into taking like little loops and little ideas that I was playing around with in Ableton that maybe weren't working for a single song. And I'd say, okay, no big deal. Let me just bounce out this one track that I'm going to kill anyway. And now it's in the archive. We can, leave that there for whenever.
Yeah.
If I use it, great. If I don't, I don't. But it's there.
Hmm.
Um,
That's it's good though. I mean, you've got it. The organization is important because I'm like you, and like my voice memo is like 0102,
yeah.
like,
Yep.
and it's just not labeled, and try to get a little better at that. But to have it like categorized would be a big help. And there's a lot of inspiration just everywhere. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a matter of deciding that it's inspirational sometimes, that this is a cool sound and you might be able to do something with it.
I don't know if your experience is the same, but certainly for me, when I go and make these field recordings, going through them is kind of half the fun because it's almost like taking a picture. Like my
Yeah.
mind goes right back to where I was
Hmm.
when I made the recording, and it like you remember all kinds of things that you thought were gone, but they're still in there somewhere. So like when I'm traveling, I love to do it because it's like, it adds this other, like you can take pictures, which certainly does that, but the re- the recordings, it's like a different kind of space that you get your head into, and it like I said, I feel like it helps me remember more of the trip, which is
Yeah.
just that on its own is pretty cool. That makes it worth doing, even if you don't make music. Like say you're just a person who's maybe a fan of music or whatever. You have no interest in like actually like making tracks or playing an instrument or anything. I think it's just a cool thing because something about the sound takes you right back to where you were and what the weather was like and what kind of smells were in the air and who you were with. All these things. It adds a lot of depth to the experience.
I get that feeling a lot where sounds and smells
Yep.
really zap me back to certain times in my life, certain experiences.
Yeah.
I can't hear War Pigs by Black Sabbath without being teleported back to when I was playing football in ninth grade in the school. And it was actually a really miserable time in my life. I hated it. I just started playing guitar and I signed up for
Yeah.
football at the same time and I didn't want to be on the team. And
Gotcha.
I hated it. But like that just zaps me back to the locker room like instantly. And certain smells will just pull me somewhere. I wish we could record smells. Like
Yeah. I mean,
interesting
who
albums we
knows?
come out with, right? But yeah, I think you're right in that that's like a cool power of music that it does kind of it's like subconsciously recording memories, whereas like I think photos are a little more obvious in that.
Yeah, I like photos definitely do it for me, but it's a little bit of a different way.
Yeah.
There's something because I've done that too, where you take a picture somewhere and then immediately do an audio recording, so then you have both.
Hmm.
Um, and again, at least for me, it brings back a lot of the other things at that moment in time that might have been forgotten, but it's still like floating around in your subconscious somewhere. But I just find that they bring back different things for
Yeah.
some reason.
Yeah, it's
Um,
cool. That's
yeah,
definitely worth and I'm teaching a sampling course at Berkeley Online
cool,
with Ableton Live sampling course. And
cool.
it's often like brought up like, oh, what kind of mic do I need? What do I get for a field recorder? And
Yeah,
they're like, what do you have? And I sort of like embarrassedly say, I actually don't have a decent one right now. I'm using my phone usually. And
yeah,
a lot of people, and maybe it's like the marketing, like gear companies
yeah.
are really good at making you feel like you need that next thing to make your
Hmm.
hit finally.
Hmm.
And I just find like just using what you have is so important, and like the phone is a really powerful tool. And sometimes even like the character, the sort of lousy character of the mic is cool. There was back in the when I first started like kind of getting a little more serious into recording,
Yeah.
a buddy of mine and I we both put our money together and bought like old 8-at machines and a
Yep.
mixer, the
Yeah.
VHS 8-at. We bought
Yeah.
two of those and we bought some like decent mics. And his grandfather loves to like go garage sailing, and he'll anytime there's a musical instrument, he picks one up. And I think this is where we got this like old Radio Shack realistic mic, and it was like our joke mic. It's like it
Okay.
was like a cheap mic. It didn't really sound that
Yeah.
great compared to like what we were getting. But there
Yeah.
was this funny thing where we would sometimes, like say we were recording drums, just put it in the back of the room and just let it record. And if you listen to it isolated, it sounded garbagey. It didn't sound good, but
Right.
softly in the mix, it was like that. It added like something special, and it just like kind of proved to me that, and it's that particular mic, and as well as this old like cheap Yamaha like
Hmm.
100 different sounds like you get as a kid, like
Yeah.
they've got like all the beats and all the sample demo songs. Sound really cheesy, but I was able to actually make some of those sounds work in some songs. Whereas if the whole song was recorded with that mic and with that keyboard, it would sound silly. But having just like a little sprinkle in there kind of taught me like there's something about like just the character of something sometimes, even if it's a bad feature of that
Quote
particular.
unquote bad.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
bad is like sometimes good. If you and I learned this too, like with using like samples, sampled instruments. Like you get like these like fancy VSTs that are like
Yeah.
recorded in the most immaculate studio that's the greatest piano ever built.
Yep.
And then you like record your guitar over it and they just sound too different. Like
Yeah, they
you
don't.
can't make it work.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a good point. Is like talking about what like like when we say good or bad, like this
Mhm.
sounds good or this sounds
Yeah,
bad, like that can depend on what criteria that we're judging things by. Like if
so
you're
true.
trying to make, like if you're trying to make a $900, piano VST or something, um, then the criteria you're going to be using to judge what's good and bad, you're going to be thinking, okay, it's really expensive, right? This thing has to be immaculately recorded. There can't be any clicks. There can't be any hiss. There can't be any noise. Everything needs to be perfectly in tune and like just all I's dotted and T's
Mm.
crossed, right? And that's your criteria for what is good work and what is bad work. But if you're making music, right, and applying that, like sometimes you don't want the super clean $900 whatever, There's sometimes you don't want the boutique reverb plugin that makes everything sound like Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need like the dumpy digital reverb that like that it lives in an effects pedal that you got for $10 on eBay.
Right.
Sometimes like that's the magic sauce
Yeah.
for sure.
So true.
Because again, your criteria in that setting for what's good and what's bad isn't based on like cleanliness and detail so much. It's just based on like, does this make me feel something? Yes or no.
Mm.
And if the dumpy reverb pedal is what does that, then it's good. Then you don't need to take it much further than that.
Yeah. It's convenient when that works out, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's the best. You feel like a genius too when that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Oh
That's the
yeah,
best.
I knew this was going to be a proper thing to use here.
Yeah, yeah. You're like, oh man, this is some slick stuff. But really, it's just like you found some little nugget of gold that you maybe didn't know that you were looking for.
Yeah. That's funny. And some of my favorite recordings are the ones that aren't recorded so well, where you can hear maybe like the mechanism of the piano moving or someone in the background making too much noise when they should have been quiet. But it puts you in the
Yeah,
place. It puts you there. And I guess what you're saying earlier about like, how certain things just make you feel something.
yeah.
Sometimes it is that like that little like background noise happening that brings out the emotion a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, it's like sometimes things being too squeaky and clean, just make things sound kind of sterilized.
Hmm.
Kind of a cliched thing to say, but I think it's totally true. Um, you need, or even like sometimes people say they have like a piece of analog gear or something. It's like, why does this sound so good? Why is it? I think it's just that like there's something about the little dirt noise that's just in there that you can never get out. That the way that sits with other things. Sometimes it just pulls stuff together for some reason.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a lot of the shit that when I was younger with like my 4-track tape recorder, I'm always
yeah,
trying to get out and remove, because there's too much of that and it all builds up and gets noisy.
sure.
But now I'm like artificially injecting it in or purposely running it through a piece of garbage wire and gear just to make it sound kind of crappy, but it has a little bit of soul or something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
I love sometimes just running audio out through
Mm.
some piece of electronic gear. It might even just be like the effect totally dry and just back in.
That
Just
could do things. Yeah,
it just
yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes it sticks out of the mix a little more, or just maybe it's in my head. I don't know, but I just feel like there's something to be said about the sound or the audio becoming like real, like physical properties at some point, going through a wire and then coming back into the digital world.
Something. Yeah, it depends. Like something. I've done things like that, or like I'll take something and run it out of my monitors, record it through a microphone,
Mm,
and then send it back in. And like that's what, because like that tiny little bit of room sound gets in
yeah.
there, but it's real room sound. It's not like plug-in room sound. Sometimes that just gives it the right amount of space, and then it gets you away from that kind of computery like up everything up against the glass sort of smushed
Hmm.
sound. Like it can give a sound like a little bit more of a shape that's like easier to mix with somehow. Um, I'm like really bad with like why that works or like what physically is actually happening to the audio signal. Um, Whether it's like the acoustics of the room or like, some kind of something gets introduced just in the conversion to an analog signal and then back into a digital one. Like I don't know as much about the science as to why that works, but I know it works.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, like some of the early reverbs that you hear on like old recordings were just
Yeah.
they put a speaker in the room and mic the speaker and just set the
Yeah.
sound out and let it bounce into the bathroom or something of the studio.
Yeah.
And, people go back and like, how did they get that reverb? that's
They got a
that's the
room.
bathtub. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But
Yeah.
that's like, I guess, a lot of the fun for me, is just like finding these weird things that produce these like pleasing results.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple recordings that I'd heard where like they were able to get some like this cool like kind of texture happening like over the snare drum or something, and I'd be freaking out as to like how are they doing it? But it was like it was some kind of quirky thing where they like sampled leaves being stepped on,
Hmm.
then like put it through some reverb thing or like played it through a speaker, recorded that, then layered it on top of the snare,
Oh,
and
that's
then it
cool.
like stuff like that is like something that you would never like what's the word? Like you would probably never think like all in your head to be like, oh, we just do this and then do this and then put it together and it'll sound like $1 million.
Yeah.
It's
It's hard
stuff
to
like that. I
reverse
don't.
engineer that.
Yeah, I think it don't stuff like that only comes about from just like getting out and doing it and trying some things and then like then and maybe you do like three different or five different versions of that and four of them don't work. But then you find the one that like really sits for some reason and you're like, well, here it is. Another gold nugget that we didn't know we were looking for but found.
Yeah, right? Isn't that weird? That's
Yeah.
is that's the exploration part that I'm coming to learn that is probably one of my favorite parts about making music is like it's like I'm, some old explorer on a big ship looking for the new world or something, but I love that like adventure of it. Like what happens if I sample this sound? What happens if I layer this in with this and, reverse it and pitch it down and who knows what? It's just as much as I do it, you think you'd get a better understanding of like what's going to happen. And I mean, I guess you do, but
You do, yeah.
there's always a surprise. There's always like some weird thing you unlock that you had no idea was there until you just started, you know, playing around.
I at least for me, most of the time, if I sit down and try to be super linear about it and say like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I need to write a track at this many BPM and it needs to be this long and like sometimes I've done this has been a couple times when it worked, but I feel like more often than not, I'll get something that I'm like maybe all right with, or maybe I'm not happy with it. Um, in general, I get way better results when I just sit down without that kind of expectation and just say, hey, I have 2 or 3 hours to do something. I'm just going to focus on making sound
Mm,
and let that take me where it does. So sometimes you sit down and it's just you end up getting like a bunch of bleeps and bloops, and it's not like super productive, quote unquote, right?
hmm
But it satisfied the criteria. Like, okay, I sat down and made sound, and now I'm done. But a lot of the time, what happens is I start making sound, and then you find something that's exciting, and then like the dots start to connect, and you're like, okay, so then I could take this and put this beat under it, and oh, maybe I could put a bass line, and then like it all kind of happens quickly. Um, I feel at least most of the time that's when I get better results.
hmm
Is when I come into it a little bit more laterally, um, or even with like practicing an instrument, right? Like that's something we haven't talked about a ton. Like, um, sometimes you like if as a live performer, like you got to just sit down and work on stuff, and you really don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and I've been that kind of person where I always have to push myself to start practicing. Like I just never want to do it. But once I get in there and start just making sound and playing a little bit, then it's like the little kid that you can't get them into the bathtub and then you can't get them out once they're in there. They're just, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
you're like, oh, this is awesome. Like you got all the stuff, you know. So I find I'm a lot like that, where I have to push myself to like get the instrument out of the case and get the thing set up. But then once I'm there, then it's great. Then I'll be there all day, and you get a lot of work done. But I just need to get to that space where it's like you kind of like it's better if I set the bar low,
Yeah.
because then you get like an easy win right away, and then that keeps you motivated to do more. Um, which is something that people all over the place talk about, but I never really got it until maybe a couple of years ago, where I was like, "Oh, this is how it's working."
Yeah, I think that like kind of tiny goal, micro goal kind of thing is pretty powerful. Like if you just make it, I'm just gonna, I just have to practice my instrument for 3 minutes today.
Right.
It's very unlikely
Exactly.
you're gonna just stick for 3 minutes, you know. And I do that sometimes with music when I'm trying to write something. All right, I'm just gonna spend 10 minutes. That's it, just 10 minutes. Within 10 minutes, the excitement, I find it,
It's
where
yeah.
it's, and that's for me is one of the hardest parts is just sitting down and starting to do
Hmm.
to do it. And it's so funny, like if you were to like watch my mind from a third person, because I spend so much time like daydreaming, thinking about making music, or if I didn't
Sure.
have to be here, I could be doing. And then when I have the free
Yeah.
time, it's like, well, I could probably do the dishes, or I can think of a billion other things to do. But just sitting down is hard. But the like kind of mental trick, which I think I'm starting to catch on to, is to like just a couple minutes. That's it. And
Oh, that couple minutes thing. That thing that's got me like that's been a little bit like the kiss of death when I do that like right before bed. I'm like, oh, let me
oh
just
yeah.
like play around with something for like 5, 10 minutes. You know, just not, I'm not sleepy yet, and then 3 hours later,
Yeah.
you're like, oh God, I was supposed to be in bed 2 hours ago. What happened? Tomorrow's gonna hurt. You know, been down that road many times,
Yeah, I
but
think anyone listening to this show knows that feeling of like losing like untold hours of your time,
yeah,
working on
yeah,
doing music. It's such a weird thing because music is so like time based, yet it's
yep,
so easy for it to slip away, you
yeah.
know, where all those hours go by and you're working on like a 2 minute piece of music.
That's the truth, man. I can't like anytime I get doubts in my mind where I'm like, oh, maybe I should go do something else or whatever. Like, then like something like that happens, and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, this is I'm probably doing the right thing at the end of the day. If I could sit here and spend a whole afternoon just like playing around with synths or making sampler instruments or something, or like this week it's been learning like R&B tunes
Oh,
on
cool.
electric bass. Like, yeah, so I'm like, okay, if I can just slip into that flow state where you're just working and the time like hours pass, and it feels like minutes. That's every time that happens. I said, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This
Mm.
makes sense,
Yeah, that's
because
one of
that
my
doesn't happen
favorite
with a lot of other
feelings.
things.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
It's definitely a nice time, and as soon as you realize it, you usually are out, then you're
yeah,
back. You
exactly.
lost it, but it is a cool thing.
Yeah,
Some of my
for
favorite
sure.
things are the types of things that take me there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I get like that with other things for sure, but music is very much the constant in my life
Hmm.
that gets me there more than other things.
Yeah, there's something about it, right? It's the weird combination of the technical and the creative and the, you know, I don't, it's still a mystery to me. So I kind of like that.
Yeah, I think with the Ableton stuff especially, it's kind of like it's like the part of your brain like that in other people like gets sucked into like video games. I think like that's like with me, it got instead of going into like like Little Big Planet, it went into Ableton Live.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because it's the same kind of thing where it's like, um, you're working with technology, and it's a lot of it's a certain kind of problem solving, where it's maybe not. Uh, it's like a little bit more spread out. You're trying to like pull together a bunch of stuff to to make something a little bit more focused.
Hmm. That's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. So there were like a couple cool things I wanted to just point out about the book and maybe ask you a little bit about. I
Yeah.
love the in the preface how you start out by saying like, you were thinking about doing this idea and everyone told you not to, and you went ahead and did it anyway.
Yes.
But is that like more like that they didn't and think that it would be something people want, or are you giving away too many
Both.
secrets? It's a little bit of both.
Both. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of I take no credit for this idea, but because everybody says this, and I think it's true. It's like you, I think you'll be way better off if you think abundantly, like in terms of, or it's like thinking abundantly as opposed to thinking in a scarce way.
Hmm.
Um, and I think when you think in terms of scarcity, like, oh, there's not enough gigs, or there's not enough work, and I have to, you sort of squirrel away the little that I have just for me so somebody else doesn't take it. I think that just tightens you up and it closes you off to a lot of things that you would want in your life. And I've definitely caught myself thinking that way, where you're just like focused on what's right in front of you, and you forget that there. Oh wait, there's this whole wide world out there,
Yeah.
and there's plenty for everybody. So and I think some, like when I was putting the idea out, and some people were saying not to do it because they're like, "Oh, you're gonna give away, your edge or whatever." I'm like, "No, I'm not. Like that's stupid. What are you talking about?" Um, so yeah, there was like one or two people who I would consider pretty close friends who were like, "Oh, you shouldn't do this. You're helping your competition."
Hmm.
But I'm like, that hasn't been my experience at all. Like especially as a bass player, like I think it does the opposite actually. When I share some of the stuff that's been working for me with other musicians, and then they do a little, like they get something they do better, or like it opens up some more work or a cool opportunity, and I was part of what helped them get there, like then that just brings us closer together. So then next time when they need a bass guy, or I can help them somehow. They're gonna think of me. It helps everybody, um, and I think that's a beautiful thing. That's how stuff is supposed to work.
Hmm.
Um, so there's that, and then like there was definitely some other people who were kind of poo pooing the idea, like, oh, like what do you know? Like what could you possibly have to share? And for a certain amount of time, I was that person
Yeah.
with myself. I was saying like, nobody's gonna. Who wants to listen to me? Like what? I, I'm no genius or whatever, but I don't know. I think in today's world with the like all these removed barriers in terms of like publishing and putting stuff out there, like with music, big time that's happening. It's you could just make music in your house and then put it on Spotify or iTunes, and anybody in the world can listen to it. That's pretty incredible. And publishing it's in a similar thing. Like I think like the in terms of like book publishing, it- I don't know as much about how that business works, but as an outsider, it seems like it's kind of having this like Napster moment,
Hmm.
um, where just a lot of barriers that used to be in place that kept people out are going away now. Like my book, a lot of people would ask who I published it through, and I said nobody. I just did it. Um, it's There's so many services now where you can put the book together and get a paperback bound yourself for
Yeah.
very affordably. And you could get it on Amazon.com. You could sell it on your own website. You could put it in a Shopify store, like whatever you want to do. So I said, that being the situation, if I do this thing, and one, I'm going to get something out of doing it, just the process of putting the book together. Like I know one example in the book I give, if somebody's totally new to like any kind of entrepreneurial stuff, The most simple example I could think of is go make a sticker for your band and figure out how to get that made, get artwork, and sell it. If you could
Mm.
do that and you've never sold a thing in your life, that'll teach you a bunch of things right away.
Yeah.
And it's an easy win, right? It's something that's not at all like a high mark to hit. So this book project for me was kind of the same sort of thing. It's not super hard to do, but at the time I said this is something that's a reach for me. So I thought it was healthy to do. So if I did it and it sold 0 copies, I would still get something out of it.
Mm.
That's how I looked at it. And but I said I probably wouldn't. There's going to be at least a couple people who are interested in this thing. So then I said, okay, cool. So if I do it, I get the benefits of just doing it. And then if I help, even if it's a small number of people, if 20 people read it and are like, wow, this is just what I needed, I've gotten a couple emails from people, like with like pretty decent. It's not like a ton, but every now and then I'll go into my email and I'll get a random message from somebody that's like, dude, this is totally what the doctor ordered. I was all over the place. This made sense of a bunch of things. Thank you.
Mm.
Like, man, you want to talk about something that's like food for the soul. Like that's kind of it, you
Yeah.
know? So I think, people could say what they may. I got a lot out of doing it, and there's other people who thanked me for doing it, even though it's not, it doesn't need to be a bestseller. It doesn't need to be this huge thing. If it makes a difference for a couple people, then I really value that.
That's cool. And there's a
Yeah.
funny irony too, because if you are giving all of your secrets away to the point where you can no longer get yourself gigs, well, then
Yeah.
that means you had a pretty successful book. So you found success in that area. Whereas,
Well, it's not. It's like not. It's the stuff isn't like. It's hard to have secrets now. It really is.
yeah,
Like the like a lot of this stuff you could find in Google. Like the thing I was really doing is saying, hey, here's a bunch of things in one place from a person who actually does this
hmm
stuff. That's really the offer that the book is. Um, so yeah, I don't really think like that, man. Like I'm not sitting on any big secret that anybody can't find. It's all out there, but maybe somebody who's looking doesn't know where to look.
hmm
um, or maybe uh, you know they trust it more coming from a musician, like um I like or even like a musician of a similar background as them. That seems to matter for a lot of people.
right.
um like I'm trying to think of a good example. Like I love Seth Godin. I think he's
Yeah,
fantastic.
me
you,
too.
you're probably hip to him,
No,
right?
I've every day I read his blog. He puts one out
his
every
bl-
day.
I'm on the same newsletter,
Yeah,
dude.
cool.
I love his blog. He has a great podcast now.
Yeah,
He's done a
Akimbo is it
bunch.
called? Akimbo.
Akimbo.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's great.
we'll put a link.
Yeah, the Seth Godin pod. There's not that many episodes because it's new, but I think it's awesome. If you look on YouTube, he's done a couple interviews where he talks specifically about music and music careers. Also, fantastic stuff. Um, but I think somebody like that might be a little bit off the beaten path if you're, a senior at whatever conservatory.
hmm
If you're just in music land all the time, you wouldn't know about a guy like that, and you might not think to look for somebody like that. um, so it's like some of the ideas that I put forward in my book, they're coming from people like that. And I'm not at all shy about telling you where I get this stuff from. Like you could probably, if you listen to podcasts, you read business books, you could probably rattle off, 4 or 5 people where you're like, oh, he's probably coming from this dude. It's like, oh, Emilio probably reads some Tim Ferriss. He probably reads some Zig Ziglar. You're like all those guys, right? So, and I'm like again, I'm happy to tell you about that kind of stuff. I think it's great. So yeah, I just try not to. I don't like to slip into that like scarcity kind of thinking,
Mm.
where you're worried about just keeping yours for you and other people are going to take it. I don't think it works like that personally.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think you do see that sometimes with music where people got their secret channel strip or something. They think that's like the thing that's made them big. You know, they
No.
I can't let you see this project. You might see that the order in which I put my EQ and compressor, you know,
Right.
but
Right.
I think having that, when you have that mindset, then it's like, you know, you've kind of, and you write about mindset a bit too, which is where I'm kind of
Yeah.
connecting here. It's like
Yeah.
you're kind of like reinforcing this idea in your head, like you can't do this again. You know, you're unable. You are only. And Seth Godin actually on April Fool's Day, his post was like, "I'm out of ideas. I've been blogging every day for you know, whatever many years." He's like, "And today I actually ran out of ideas. This is my last one." And it's like, you know, at the end it's a joke. But his
Yeah.
point is like, you know, you're not gonna run out of ideas. Like, calm down.
No.
And
No.
so I think like what you say too about like having those mindsets is so important because, you know, like our minds are really good at you know, creating our realities. And if you create this reality where you are
Yeah.
you only have a couple good songs and a couple good ideas, well, that's how you're gonna behave. That's how you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna act.
Mm-hmm.
The abundancy is definitely important, and I think it's a much better way to think, and it's a lot less stressful too.
It's a lot less stressful. And yeah, like I said, I've met too many cool people because I try to keep that kind of headspace open. It's like how I met you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think I just sent you a cold email and was like, "Hey, dude, I'm working on this thing. I like what you're doing," because I was familiar with your stuff just through those like those sample racks and stuff that you put out.
Yeah.
I think I might have heard about it through like some Ableton newsletter. I don't exactly remember, but I was like, "Oh, this guy does cool stuff. You know, cool sounds, awesome." And like you were one of a bunch of people that I just reached out to out of the blue, and like, you know, a lot of people said no or didn't get back to me, which that happens. That just kind of comes with the territory. But you know, a lot of people got back to me too, and like, I'm trying to think, I've done a decent number of podcasts at this point. And there's been a couple podcasts where I was working on something and I had like some sticking point of another project, and I just mentioned it in passing, and then like somebody comes out of the blue and hits me up and says, "Hey, that problem you have, I might be able to help you with that," right? And then we start working on some other project together, and it spins off from just kind of putting it out there and being open to stuff, as opposed to being worried about saying too much and you know, and giving away the recipe to my secret sauce or whatever. I've gotten a lot more benefit from just being open about stuff.
It's so funny you say that because when, you know, before I started putting out my sounds and everything,
Yeah.
you know, I was doing a lot of my learning online, you know, and it was a lot
Uh-huh.
of other generous people sharing their secrets.
Yeah.
And I remember the first one I made, the first instrument rack I made was a computer feedback sound. So if you've ever like been just working on your laptop and you know, arm a track and it's listening to your internal microphone, which is sitting.
Then it takes off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it goes crazy. So I just sampled that and I made an instrument that I thought
Yes.
sounded really cool. And I thought for a second, like, I wonder if anyone would be interested in this. But then I was like, but then they'll have my sound. And I was like, well, you know, who cares?
So what?
So if I would have went with that, like, kind of, no, this is mine. I'm not, you know, because like it didn't take a genius to just record, you know, with
Right.
feedback. Like anyone could think of that. But
Yeah.
the fact that I shared it started things rolling for me in this like little
Yeah.
world. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been speaking to you right now because
Yeah.
you would never heard of me, you know?
Right. For sure.
And none of this, I probably wouldn't be in this world of doing a podcast even just, and it's
Yeah.
all through sharing, putting things out and, you know, giving. And I think that's, and I've gotten so much more in return, you know? It's like, it's so enriching to, like you said, like someone sends you a track with your sound in it, or just have the fact that I get to have this conversation with you right now is really great. There's a lot of useful
Word.
information, a lot of like things I'm thinking about now that's changing my perspectives on things.
Hmm.
So powerful, and it's there's got to be like some old saying that it's escaping my mind, but like, it's like the more you
Yeah.
give, the more you receive. These like kind of weird opposites that sometimes we get possessive over things, and well, that just closes you off. That just, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Well, something like that. That feedback sampler instrument is a good example because, like, it's like if you have a laptop and a sampler, like whether it's the Logic one or the Ableton one or whatever, like the physics of that are available to
yeah.
everybody. So like you thinking that you have this secret thing would be it's kind of silly, like
Yeah.
because you really don't.
That's an ego malfunction or something. And it
Right,
wasn't
right,
the first
exactly.
time I'd made that noise either. I've done it 1,000 times
Oh
before
yeah,
and
of course.
since. So it wasn't like I found it all of a sudden.
Yeah, it was there waiting for you.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, it didn't take a genius to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
I think a lot of people think though that it does take a genius, like to do a lot of things. And the funny thing for me too, when I put that first instrument out, I got a little bit more response than I'd ever gotten before on anything I'd ever done. And I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm gonna keep doing this.
Yeah.
And I did it a couple times, and then I'm starting to get like responses from people that they're asking me like questions that are well beyond my understanding, and they assume I'm some sort of expert.
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot since, but at the time I was just figuring all this stuff out myself. And it
Sure.
was sort of like that idea that you brought up earlier, like because you were a new graduate, you had
Yeah.
that perspective.
Yeah.
So I found like it was very funny to me, like when people like asking me these questions, like that I didn't know the answer to. I'm like, hey, these people think I'm an expert, like like the illusion of expert. I think Tim Ferriss talks about that in the 4 Hour Work Week.
Yeah.
That it's not hard to create that illusion. um,
Sometimes, yeah. That one is it sort of depends, but
yeah, but like it's just this thing that happens sometimes. And
hmm
I'm sure not everyone thought. I'm sure there were a lot of people that were like looking at my work and be like, why do you do it that way? That was clearly the moron way.
yeah.
But it's encouraged me to move forward and just create all those different things I never would have done before and go down
Sure.
paths I never would have gone down if it wasn't for that kind of abundant mindset. Or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree with that kind of thing. It's only yeah, it's something that the more I get into it, the better things seem to get.
yeah,
So I think that alone is a strong enough argument to sort of strive for that. And I think you'll be a happier person too. That's the other one.
yeah, I think so. I mean, how cool is it that someone would say to you like, "Hey, you helped me get this. You helped me advance here," and you never know. And I've got your preface open right now. A rising tide lifts all boats from JFK.
JFK, man. Yeah.
And like you never know, that person might hit it big one day. They might make it,
Yeah.
and offer you a spot on their show or something. That there's just like there's no good reason to like guard these things and to be
No, especially now, definitely not. It's just like with the internet and I think the way that things are kind of moving in general is society is becoming more transparent.
mhm,
Again, just in general, like across the board in a lot of categories. So
like it or not.
um, yeah, I think it's a good thing
Yeah,
ultimately. So I think it's just it's kind of silly and backwards looking to try and fight that because especially like um, some like in the electronic music world when people get protective over like specific sounds or samples or something like it's like the real it's like the value isn't so much in the samples or the sounds you have on your computer, it's in the skills that
mhm,
you have that let you make that stuff. Or the value is in the discipline that gets you to sit down every day after, like whenever you have the time, whether it's before work or whenever, um, to get you to sit down and be like, okay, we're gonna make something. It might be good, it might be bad, but we're gonna just get something to happen here, and then when we're done, and that's it. There's more value in that, I think, than, like I said, some specific sample pack that you have
Oh yeah.
like sitting in your hard drive.
Well, could you imagine if that's what the difference was? And
Yeah,
I can remember being in those mindsets though, like finding out like what different people were using. Oh, what DAW they use? Oh, maybe if I use that. Yeah, and then
yeah,
or then you hear like a great song and you're like, man, how'd they do that? And it's like, I use that plugin that's on your computer too, or that drum loop that you have also.
yeah,
I'm not sure if this is true or not, but it makes the point. So I've
yeah.
kind of internalized it as being true. But
Hmm.
Tom York of Radiohead, I think it was his Eraser album.
Hmm.
Somewhere I heard, and I don't know how true this is, but like I said, it makes the point that a lot of that was made up with like Apple loops from GarageBand.
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's truth to that.
Um,
I don't know.
I don't know how true or false that is, but it's funny. The thing I was just thinking about was like how relative all this stuff is. Like if you took a copy of GarageBand, right, um, and then you teleported back to 1991 and showed it to somebody, be like, "Look, this is called GarageBand. It's this new software. Look what it can do," and you just showed them, right? They would probably think that it was like, a $3,000 software suite. It just in terms of like, you know what I mean? Like just the fact that something as people think of GarageBand as like simple software, but you can do some stuff in there. There's a lot that you could make. Like so, if again, I think it's more about the skills than the specific sounds or
Hmm.
the tools that you're using. Um, so, and you think about that, like compared to some of the DAWs that they had in like the early 90s or 80s or something. Even like the bottom floor of what we have now is still like has some significant advantages over what they were using
Sure,
back then.
sure.
And back then they were still making amazing music. So the values in the skills and the discipline, not the tools so much.
Hmm. Yeah, it is interesting because I mean, we'll never be able to answer this, but like, are we making better music now because we have all this technology? It's like, I don't know. I'm sure you could
Yeah,
argue either way, but the fact that you can argue either way goes to show that it has a lot more to do with like the skill, the talent, the imaginations of people than.
yeah. I think I wouldn't say it's necessarily better or worse, but like one thing that the new tools do for us is they open up um, sort like new places to explore
Mhm.
for sure. So I think we're just sort of cracking open some different stones that we
Yeah,
weren't able to smash a couple years ago. That's
right.
what's happening. I think.
Yeah, I often try to avoid like better or worse, good or bad when I'm thinking about
Yeah,
music too, because it is so subjective. And I mean, so much of the music I like is like technically a bad recording, but I love like maybe like a lo-fi
yeah,
sound or something. So
yeah,
it's hard to say good, bad, but yeah, I think like you make the great point that it's really like your craft, your skill, your dedication to it, the work you put in.
yep, yeah,
I love how in your book you've got like these like actionable items or actionable steps where it's
oh
like
yeah,
do this, you're having trouble doing this. Well, here you go. This is what you're going to do. It's so
yeah,
important because it's like where do you start? And especially if you're never if you didn't grow up doing this, if you haven't been around groups of people that are in this too that you can
hmm,
speak to, like
yeah,
you put it really like, okay, this is what you want to do, this is what you're trying to work on. Try this. Do this.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to do that for yourself as much as possible. Like, kind of the one of the points of doing that was, well, part of it was like the activities in themselves was to give something for people that they could take right away and give a go at it. But I think the other thing that's really important to take away from that is the idea that you need to do that for yourself. Like if you have something that I don't talk about at all in the book, it's really important to sit down and say like, okay, this is where I want to get to. These are probably the steps it's going to take. How do I turn that into some activity that I'm going to do over a period of time, whether that's, you know, um, like learning some kind of new thing on your instrument, or if you're trying to learn about a production technique, or if you want to hit some bigger goal, like if you say, I want to put out an album this year. Okay, how do you that's got a couple
Hmm.
moving parts to it. How do you break that up into things that you're going to sit down and actually do?
Yeah.
What does that look like? How do you make it into some kind of task as opposed to an idea that you have?
Right. Something you can
Um,
do a little bit every day.
Something you can
Yeah.
chip away at. Yeah, or like it's just like breaking down the elephant into bite-sized pieces.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's what it's really about. So, um, yeah, one of the reasons I put that in every chapter is I wanted to hammer in the idea that's how you get some of this stuff done. Is you got to sit down, have a vision, then step that towards some kind of plan with steps that you can execute on.
Hmm. Yeah. Most things I think you can break down like that, and
Yeah,
it's a great, it's empowering too. Really, when you get that experience of something small building and building into something
yep,
larger.
yeah, yeah. It's
But,
that again. That's one of those things that I wasn't really I wasn't told to do, or we didn't talk about that much when I was um, in college and all that.
hmm.
It was almost, it was like 95% focused on just the craft um, of like playing the instrument and understanding the repertoire and all that kind of stuff. The rest wasn't really talked about a ton, um, and we weren't really taught that much how to build something bigger than what you have just going on in your fingers to play the instrument.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, like business people might look at it and be like, "Well, yeah, duh," but but we didn't get so much of that, So I thought it was important to put out there.
Well, I think there's a big disconnect in school in general. I know it is in what I teach. I mean, like
Yeah,
where's this practical information? And for most students I work with, the practical application of what they're learning is the test.
yeah,
The thing they're going to do one day and never
hmm
again. And
yeah,
it just no wonder they say, well, what's the point of this? What's the point of school? Why do we need to know this? Like
hmm
it's nothing to be insulted about. It's a honest question, I think.
yeah, yeah,
And it doesn't always get addressed. And like so many people are paying good money for educations, working hard, and then it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, good
that's
luck.
it. You're done. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
goodbye.
and how many people, I'm sure you know tons of people that have these advanced degrees and then go working jobs that have nothing to do with it.
You know, as I'm a bass player, so if I go in with the approach of like, okay, this is technical training that's gonna get me to the level where I'm gonna play in a professional orchestra somewhere. Um, then I think if you look at it that way, you're gonna be in for a little bit of a rude awakening, right? Like in terms of orchestral jobs, there's just not um, a ton of that. I mean, they're out there, but it's you can count on one hand sometimes how many job openings there are that pay like a real living. Um, and I think but the real problem with that is it walls you off from a lot of other things you could be doing, where people would be happy to have somebody with that kind of background and that kind of training. Um, but you have to be open to going for that kind of stuff and doing it. So I think if you you know look at music school as an education that gives you kind of this base that you can leverage that in a number of different ways.
Hmm.
I think things will just be more interesting. You'll be happier. You have a lot more options as far as looking for work and that kind of thing. Um, and I think it opens up a lot more avenues for creativity, as opposed to just being like, nope, I trained to do this, and then I'm going to go and do that thing that I was taught to do in school, and that's it.
Yeah.
Um, I know some people who did it, and they're okay with that. They're doing well, but I think that doesn't really work as well for the majority of people who are going to go through one of those programs.
Hmm. Yeah, it teaches you there's a little flexibility there too, and like you
Oh yeah,
said,
for sure.
creativity. Yeah,
There's all kinds of stuff.
and like the way the trend is with the world, like it's not like most people are working for one company for a whole career.
Yeah.
A lot of it's
Oh yeah,
piecemeal.
yeah.
And I think, for me with like the work I do with music, it's kind of fun because I have a lot of different ways to approach it.
Hmm.
And a very small amount of that has to actually do with making music
Yeah.
in a weird way where, like I'm not like seeing crazy sales on anything I'm putting out, but it's
Hmm.
also allowing me by doing these other things. It's allowing me to make that music.
Yeah,
And,
for sure.
I think it's important to think that way, to think kind of like flexibly, like you can make these like lateral movements from one thing to the next. Because
Yes.
like you said, it's very hard to like maybe like land like your orchestral gig and that's like your
Yeah.
career. Like you gotta also have other things going usually. And
Yeah.
it's not just music either. It's a lot of different, fields are like that. I think more so
Yeah.
as we move in this world. But you make a great point, like this idea, like putting out the sticker is so cool, just to get that
Simple.
experience
Yeah.
because, you are a trained musician. You're not a businessman by trade, by schooling, but
Correct.
you've, proven on another level that like you can take some of those skills and apply it to the stuff you've learned with music.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I have this other project that I've worked on where I sell a bass end pin.
Hmm.
I don't know if you dug into any of
I
that.
saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was like another thing that I just did. At it was to fill one of my own needs, and then I just decided to push ahead and go for it and find to see if it was something that people wanted.
Hmm.
So I mean, right, it's been doing pretty well. I mean, right now they're sold out. I got to figure out when the next shipment's coming in, but yeah, just the fact that like I was able to come up with an idea independently and get a little bit of help with the things I couldn't do, like cutting the metal and some of the design stuff. And then being able to set up a little Shopify store and start selling them as a one man operation, like that's an incredibly powerful thing.
Yeah.
That's very directly tied in with my music making, and also something that's put me in touch with a lot of other amazing musicians just from making this bass gadget.
Right.
Um, so that's that's kind of an example of what I'm talking about, where it's not related to like playing or writing so much, but it's definitely related to the whole big picture of music
Yeah.
making.
Well, you were able to, because of your experience, identify a certain
Right,
problem and come up with a solution for it,
right.
which is, again, like, I don't think, you know, the average person that might even have those technical skills to build it are going to just like walk by a bass player or a cellist and be like, I know what you need. That's something like you've had the
Yeah,
direct experience with.
exactly. So there's that kind of stuff. Or yeah, I mean, just the more that I go, there's like even certain parts of the music business that I didn't really think about that much or even know about. Like right now, like I'm writing more electronic music than I probably ever have. I'm working with a couple different local people, just as collaborators, people who write lyrics and sing and that kind of stuff. Um, so I've been working with them, and we're looking into doing like sync placements for commercials and that kind of
Hmm.
thing. And getting into that, and that's like I'm a total beginner in that world. I'm still like trying to figure out, how to talk to music supervisors and work with some of these libraries and that kind of thing. But it's an area of the music world that I didn't I it wasn't like discussed that much when I was training.
Yeah.
And then like I get out a little bit more and I'm like, oh, this is actually like there's a lot of stuff going on over here. This is its own ecosystem that I wasn't really hip to for a long time. And if I didn't get into producing or making electronic music, I probably would have never thought about it that much,
Hmm.
in all honesty. So that's just another one of those things where I'm like, hey, this could totally work out to be a piece of the pie. Yeah, and I'm sure if we go 10 years out, like I'll have a couple other things where I said, oh, I didn't think I was going to get into this or this or this, but it's
Right.
all, it's all in one place now.
Yeah, but to be able to recognize those opportunities when they come up, that's
Yeah,
an important thing to
for
kind of
sure.
always be vigilant for that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. It just comes down to being open, I think.
Yeah, true, right? Open-minded, open to new
Yes,
ideas.
exactly.
Right. That kind of takes us back to where we started with the kind of learning from everybody and
Yeah.
all the different layers of mentors and
Yes,
people you
exactly.
interact with, your peers.
Yeah,
Very cool.
exactly.
Well, maybe that's a good place to wrap it up then.
I'm with it, man. That sounds
Yeah.
great.
Listen, thanks so much for taking the time. It was really fun talking to you. Lots of cool stuff. I have to highly recommend the book, Make It.
Nice.
I know you sell that on your site.
Yeah,
I don't know if I want to quote the prices in case that changes for you, but it's cheap. It's like
yeah,
silly not to get this book, honestly,
yeah.
everybody. It's so helpful. And you have an audiobook, right?
Yeah, so you can get
Which
the
I love
ebook.
audiobooks,
You can get an ebook or an audiobook narrated by yours truly.
yeah.
Those are both on my website, emilioguarino.com. You can also, if you want a paperback, you can get that through Amazon.
Mhm.
If you just, search in there, everything will come up. You can get, also there's a Kindle version of it if you're a Kindle person, which again, that's like, I forget what the price is because it does change a little bit on Amazon.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I think the Kindle version is like $2 or $3. Like
Oh
it's
wow.
really not that much money.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well,
it's
that's silly to pass up.
yeah, it usually works out. So Kindle is the cheapest one, and then the stuff on my site is kind of in the middle, and then the most expensive option is the paperback through Amazon. So
Mhm.
hopefully between one of those options, you can find something that works for you. I know some people like audiobooks, some people like they like the real thing, some people do e-readers, so it's available in all those formats.
Yeah. Well, that's great because yeah, I'm all over the place with the different formats too. Myself, I've got
Hmm.
like PDFs I read, and then I listen to a lot of audiobooks. So it's cool that you have that too. But I think like people of all different levels and kinds. I know you say it's a guide for recent music graduates,
Yeah.
but I think we can probably allow other people to read it too. I mean, because it's so practical. It's got a lot of
Yeah.
great things. I mean, even like this stuff you talk about gigging, which is really
Yeah.
just like super helpful stuff. Like preparing yourself, like arriving early. And I love that you make it. That's I know we're wrapping it up, but like there's so many
Mhm.
things.
Yep.
I have some notes that I wanted to mention.
Sure.
You talk about just like arriving at the gig early equals sounding better, and it's so true. I can't
Oh
tell you how
yeah.
many times I've showed up at the show late, and it's like you're on, get up,
Bus frazzles. He's like,
and
I
yeah,
gotta.
that doesn't ever work out well.
No.
So it's like a lot of great practical advice, and I think like you said, it's like nice how you've kind of categorized it. It's like works for yourself, but it's really, really good information for lots of people.
Mhm.
Um, I recommend it highly. I'm really enjoying it myself. And
Awesome.
so thanks again for
My
taking the
pleasure.
time.
Yeah.
And it's emilioguarino.com. I'll
Yep.
put the show notes in there. I'll put links to the book on the music production website. That's just afrodjmac.com/podcast. Yeah. So again, thanks so much. I look forward to maybe getting in touch with you sometime down the road, hearing about some of the other fun things you're doing to,
Oh yeah.
expand on your career and
Cool.
share that wisdom with us all.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad we could get together and do this and just rap about this stuff for a little bit.
Yeah, cool. Thanks so much for taking the time. I do appreciate it.
Awesome.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye.